News 2 presents To the Point.
Today's First Point, the first and only televised debate between South Carolina's governor candidates. Today we're breaking down what Governor Henry McMaster and challenger Joe Cunningham had to say. Second point, some of South Carolina's key politicians are picking sides in the election over South Carolina's next state superintendent of education. This morning we're finding out how they're making their final pushes for that position. And our third point, candidates getting a chance to put their issues on the table in Dorchester County. We'll tell you about a forum held in the last week. Welcome to the Point, the show where we break down the political issues and elections that matter to you from across the Lowcountry, here in South Carolina and the entire nation. Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning. I'm Raleigh Benson. News 2 is your local election headquarters. In this week, Republican incumbent Governor Henry McMaster and Democratic challenger and former U.S. Congressman Joe Cunningham went face-to-face in the only gubernatorial debate. It happened in Columbia. Our Jason Raven was there and has more.
Debate night in South Carolina. Incumbent Republican Governor Henry McMaster and Democratic challenger former Congressman Joe Cunningham face off.
We've had to battle Washington the whole time. I've never seen so many bad ideas come out of one place in such a short period of time in all my life.
I'm sick and tired of the divisiveness. I'm also sick and tired of the extremists in politics, just like Governor McMaster.
And right away, both were asked about their differing views on abortion.
If politicians are able to come into your doctor's offices, what could they not do? If an abortion ban comes to the governor's desk without exceptions, he'll sign it, and I'll veto it.
What Mr. Cunningham, as far as pre-Roe, and as we know, that allowed abortions up to 24 weeks. That is 6 months for any reason or no reason at all. That is the radical position.
With South Carolinians impacted by inflation and bracing for a possible recession, each candidate talked about their economic policies.
Do you know that the income tax rates in South Carolina have never been cut before? We cut them this time from 7%, and it's going to go down to 6%.
Folks, we can be that economic lighthouse for businesses that will either want to grow or expand into South Carolina. But we have to have new ideas, and we have to have a new vision.
Now, both Cunningham and McMaster say they will look to make changes to the state's criminal justice system and take steps to keep violent repeat offenders behind bars.
The governor's catch and release program on violent offenders is clearly not working, and every single person in this state should feel safe when their kids walk out the door.
We need to have reform. We need to enhance the penalties. But the main thing is we have to see that we're catching these people.
Now, both candidates said they would accept the results of November's election. In Columbia, I'm Jason Raven.
News 2's political analyst John Brasini joining me now. John, a lot to break down from this debate. Now, you and I had a chance to participate in the first congressional debate. A lot of those topics we heard on that night repeated again in this debate between gubernatorial candidates Joe Cunningham and Governor Henry McMaster. Economy, abortion, a lot of things to take away from this. Kind of maybe what are your takeaways, initial thoughts?
So again, we probably saw both candidates run relatively, their perspectives are relatively traditional regarding their background and their base.
Right.
Again, Governor McMaster, very pro-business, very pro-jobs. This is what I've done to help to spur the economy. Congressman Cunningham, based on his performance, he's been unapologetically different, saying, you know what, I've bucked my party, I voted against Nancy Pelosi. It's time for a generational switch in Columbia, perhaps even nationally, and I'm the guy to lead us into that change.
John, I had a chance to chat with Congressman Cunningham this past week, and, some of the things we talked about. Day one, he wants to expand Medicare in South Carolina. When we look at healthcare in South Carolina, your takeaway, they kind of got into that a little bit this week. What are your thoughts?
So this is probably one of the biggest dividers that we see between the two parties. And this is something that Democrats have ran on for quite some time now. It's something that former Governor Nikki Haley did not want to do. Former Congressman Cunningham is basically saying, you put me in the governor's mansion, we'll expand that. Democrats look at this, number one, as helping to expand access to health care, which a lot of our rural areas in South Carolina are struggling with. And then certainly they also believe it's going to help to reduce health care cost for everyone. Again, Republicans don't agree with that. Probably, again, one of the larger dividing issues between the two.
John, of course, abortion has been the topic that's really dominated politics this past summer, and you hear these two talk about it. Your thoughts on where their stances are? Obviously, a big difference. Kind of your takeaways from the debate.
So again, Governor McMaster has made no secret about what his views on abortion are. If the General Assembly does send him a bill that basically outlaws all abortion, he would welcomely sign that. Congressman Cunningham is saying if you are afraid of that, you do not want to be in a state that, again, has any type of complete total abortion ban, you need to elect me because I would veto that type of bill. We see, again, the campaign going back and forth. They want to go back to more of a Roe versus Wade type state, where the states could still institute some exceptions, but again, there would be a little bit more flexibility.
John, these two have kind of gone back and forth in the last couple of weeks, kind of sparring with each other. It was interesting to see some of that come out. You hear some different punches towards each other, some gaffes. I mean, your thoughts on that stance and these two kind of going back and forth for the first time?
So again, for those of us who love political theater, this is great entertainment. And I expect we'll probably see some of that begin to heat up and to begin to ramp up a little bit leading into November's election. Republicans in South Carolina across the state, they hold just a fundamental advantage right now, especially if we look back at maybe the past two elections. Congressman Cunningham, he's developing some momentum. Democrats, it looks like maybe nationwide, might be closing the gap a little bit, at least based on some of the most recent polling. Whether that translates to South Carolina or not, it's too soon to tell.
John, this will be the only time these two candidates will go face to face now that we're just a little over a week away from Election Day. The things that you think voters should maybe look to pull out from this if you're undecided, any kind of final thoughts, last minute advice, or anything voters should look at as we're almost to Election Day?
So number one, what matters to you as a voter? Again, whether it's the economy, whether it happened to be abortion, whether it be state infrastructure and roads. Then pick the candidate that most aligns to those values. Again, Governor McMaster's running a pretty traditional Republican campaign, very pro-business, again, recruiting business in return that helps to reduce jobs. Congressman Cunningham is running on things, for example, like expanding Medicare in South Carolina, and then certainly also with helping to improve roads and infrastructure too. So again, interesting race, we'll see.
And John, we're hopefully going to cover this race a little bit more closely as we get closer to Election Day. But another big race we want to look at and talk about is the former South Carolina governor and United Nations ambassador Nikki Haley in Charleston to endorse a candidate for South Carolina State Superintendent of Education. Nikki Haley endorsed Ellen Weaver in this race. Now, Weaver is facing Democratic challenger Lisa Ellis in next month's election. If elected, Weaver says she plans to focus on people, policy, and process to rebuild the state's education system. Take a listen.
We have to get this right. It's important for our children, it's important for parents, it's important for families, and it's important for the future of South Carolina. And the way to do that is to elect Ellen Weaver for Superintendent of Education.
I am running to put the experience that I have had in over 20 years of public service to work on behalf of the students, the parents, and the teachers of this state.
You heard from Weaver there. Well, Weaver will face Democratic challenger Lisa Ellis next month's election. She sent us a statement. Ellis says her campaign is focused on putting the best teachers in classrooms, while her opponent is meeting with presidential hopefuls. The two will have a televised debate on November 2nd. Now, John, this is something, we featured these two candidates on the show, and it's a race that we've kind of talked about being kind of interesting in our state. These two will go to a debate soon, but your thoughts on where this race stands?
So Democrats are holding on to the Secretary of Education position because this was the last statewide election that Democrats won, albeit it was a very narrow margin, hundreds of votes. You have to go back to 2006 to look at Jim Rex's victory. There's some fundamental differences here. Again, school choice and vouchers are probably two of the biggest issues. The Weaver campaign, again, definitely pro-school choice, very pro-school voucher. Lisa Ellis brings her own experience there, and certainly isn't going to back any type of those types of initiatives.
John, you look at a person like Nikki Haley, who, obviously a former governor in South Carolina, a former United Nations ambassador, to have that kind of weight for her endorsement. I mean, how much does that impact this race when you look at things in South Carolina? So
endorsements are interesting. Again, and a lot of it depends on who they come from. It's no secret that former Governor Haley has national aspirations. Again, that's pretty wide known. Right. She may be working on her own campaign right now, again, by trying to get out front and endorsing Weaver. Number one, it helps to show that she still has an interest in South Carolina. It might help for her to court some voters throughout the state. And then number two, also helps to bolster her profile. As far as the Weaver campaign is concerned, anytime you get a big endorsement from someone who's really a national, maybe even international figure, it certainly helps to, again, bolster your profile and make the case to voters that you are a tried and true Republican.
John, let's kind of break down these two candidates. Obviously, Ellen Weaver has no classroom experience, but has worked under Senator Jim DeMint in the state's Oversight Education Committee. On the flip side, Lisa Ellis started SC for Ed, the Teachers Foundation organization in our state. She is a teacher at this point. So two kind of different perspectives that you're bringing into this race. I mean, your thoughts on what people should kind of look at these two candidates?
So there's a lot there for voters to really unpack. If you were looking for someone who has got tried and true classroom experience, then Lisa Ellis is your candidate. If you want someone who's got more of maybe a pro-business, let the individual citizen decide where they want to send their child to school, then the Weaver campaign might be a little more appealing to you. Another big one, remember, the state General Assembly actually changed the law and required that the state superintendent of education actually had to possess a master's degree. The Weaver campaign reports that she has in fact secured that. There's some questions surrounding how that was done and the process in which that folded out. Again, a lot for voters to unpack there. If they have any questions, comments, concerns, as we've always said, they need to use good resources and then certainly never hesitate to reach out to the campaigns directly.
John, for these two candidates, what are the biggest challenges day one, whoever wins this election? What do you think they have to tackle first when they get to the office?
So we've got a big problem in education in South Carolina. We are losing teachers right now at a record pace, and that's having a ripple effect through our entire education system. I would endeavor to imagine that that's got to be, goodness, if it's not the top tier priority, it's got to be probably in the top 2 for them to get in there and to really begin to address the teacher shortage and the fact that young people just aren't getting into education anymore.
John, certainly an election we're going to watch closely on election night. And on election night, we'll be bringing you up-to-the-minute results as they come in. You can join us November 8th as we break down the races that matter to you with crews spread out across the area and the state. We'll have full coverage on air and online at counton2.com. Later in the show, candidates in Dorchester County breaking down the issues in a forum. We'll tell you how they answered the hard questions coming up. Welcome back to the Point. We're joined now by Tom Hartnett, a candidate for the South Carolina District 110 House of Representatives. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Riley.
You know, obviously our viewers keeping a close eye on a lot of races. I want to ask you to kind of introduce yourself to them and tell us why you're running for this position.
Well, as you said, my name is Tom Hartnett. I'm a real estate appraiser. I'm a father and a husband. I have 3 boys that have been through the public school system. My wife is a public school teacher. And it was really education and issues with our schools that got me into this race. A little over a year ago, when my youngest son was entering his first year at Lucy Beckham High School, my phone started ringing from concerned friends and parents that our children were being denied access to our public education, and that our parental rights were slowly being stripped away from us. I saw that as something that needed to be protected, and I wound up in the race, entering the race because of that. People were calling, asking how I could help. My answer to them was, well, Dad may have been in Congress 35 years ago, but I'm a real estate appraiser, and there's no way I can help you. Fortunately, I knew some people over the years and was able to make some phone calls and try to get some answers for our friends.
You know, Mr. Hartnett, this district represents a kind of a wide portion of Charleston County, some areas downtown, some Mount Pleasant, some across the Ashley River. So, you know, my question is, what are your goals for this district and for the state of South Carolina if you're to be elected?
My goals, education is one of my main concerns right now. As I said, our children need to be educated, not indoctrinated. That we seem to be co-parenting with the federal government, and that's not something I want to do. Federal government overreach has come into our schools. I want to do everything that I can to get the resources and the money that our teachers need to get it into the classrooms. Our teachers, we've got great schools here in 110 with great parental support, but our teachers don't have the resources that they need. We need more money following the student into the classroom. We need smaller class sizes. We need more guidance counselors on every level. That one guidance counselor per level is not enough to handle the students that we have. So mainly focusing on education and what I can do to help improve our schools and help make lives better for our teachers and our students.
Mr. Hartnett, we sit about a week from Election Day at this point, so my question is, you know, what's your message to voters as they're preparing to go to the ballot box? Some already voting and early voting. What do you want Charleston County voters to know who could be voting for you?
Well, I'd like Charleston County voters to know that I've been painted as an extremist and as a developer that's bent on the destruction of the Low Country. I'm that which is furthest from the truth. I'm a real estate appraiser. My main focus has been on conservation and preservation. I work with landowners to preserve property. I'm extremely concerned about education. All three of my boys have been through or are in the public school system. My wife is a public school teacher. And people need to know that, yes, I am concerned with the environment. Yes, I am concerned with education, and I'm not the person that I'm being painted to be.
Mr. Hartnett, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on To The Point.
Well, thank you, Riley. I appreciate you having me today.
Guys, thank you so much. After the point, we'll come back for our third point on this morning's episode. See you on the other side of this break. News 2 is your local election headquarters, and last week voters in Dorchester County got the chance to hear directly from candidates as they prepare to vote in the election. News 2's Raymond Owens talked to voters and the candidates.
Voters had a chance to listen to a number of different candidates for both county council and the state house here for about 2.5 hours tonight.
I love the forum. I like the hometown, small venue. You get a chance to really get to know and hear what your prospective candidates have to really say.
Thomas Watson was one of the few people I could find not already with a candidate or party. County council candidates each answered 3 questions. Do you support the 1% roads tax that will be on the ballot? What are your priorities if elected? And what position do you take on controlling growth?
Something earlier that's really close to me is control growth. Everybody wants to come to this area. We know we love the low country, and so does everybody else, unfortunately. And I think we need to do a better job of controlling that growth, and I think some of that was addressed.
Candidates for the State House then were asked their ideas for tax reform in Columbia, whether or not they support legalizing marijuana, and do they support hate crimes legislation. Most candidates seem to think some form of medical marijuana and a hate crimes bill may soon become law. The county Republican and Democratic Party leadership say this was a great opportunity for voters who took advantage of it.
I'm so proud of the Democratic Party putting up 7 competitive candidates, and the people of the county need to see these people and hear what we heard today. So I think this is a great opportunity for voters to hear firsthand from the candidates, not just sound bites, not just pieces of mail, but hear in-depth conversations about the policy issues that are facing us.
We have a lot more information about this election at our website. Just head over to counton2.com. In Somerville, I'm Raymond Owens. Count on 2.
You know, John, obviously this is good for people in Dorchester County to kind of get to see some of these candidates that, you know, you really don't get to see or hear from a whole lot. So, you know, obviously I think the biggest takeaway or one of the biggest things that they're facing in Dorchester County has to be the growth of that area just kind of blowing up at this point.
Right, you know, like the rest of the low country, Dorchester County certainly has their fair share of housing coming in, different infrastructure needs. So there are a lot of really important decisions right now that county council and their legislative delegation they're going to have to tackle.
You know, obviously we got to hear just a couple of little snippets of what's going on, but your biggest takeaways from this piece that you think voters should kind of maybe pinpoint?
So county elections, for the most part in South Carolina, are partisan. So you'll certainly see some individuals that come out and vote for either Democrats or for Republicans. You know, there's a question right now going on in politics on whether debates and forums really have any relevance left. And the further you get down ballot, the more interest begins to wane from some of these races. This is an environment where forums or debates really can help voters to make some decisions. So I'm glad it seems like most people that showed up, they got what they were looking for, and they walked away feeling good that they really have got a pretty good idea as far as who to vote for in November.
You know, John, obviously we talked about growth, but the sales tax is going to be on the ballot too come November, and so a big thing for voters to kind of hear where candidates stand on that too, correct?
Right, again, huge issue. So I mean, there are some people that say, well, I will never vote to impose a tax on myself. There are others that look at what that penny sales tax will fund and say, you want to know what, when it does come down to roads, when it comes down to infrastructure, when it comes down to things like schools, it's not a lot of money in relative perspective for some people. Let's go ahead and let's do this to really get the infrastructure changes and some of the changes that we need.
You know, John, obviously Dorchester County, all of our Charleston, Berkeley, you look at the state level races, all these things so important for voters to make sure they're getting out, they're voting, making their voices heard. Early voting has started in our state. So just quickly, as we get closer to Election Day, what do people need to know if they're planning on voting?
So number one, get your plan ready now. Know what day you plan to vote. If you do plan to vote early, if you plan to vote on Election Day, figure out what time, figure out exactly where your polling place is. It never hurts to check your registration on scvotes.gov to make sure that number one, your polling place has not changed, that your information is still correct. make sure you bring a photo ID, and just be prepared to make a decision on your candidates.
John, it's certainly going to be interesting as we are almost there. That's what we've been talking about for weeks.
Before we know it.
We're almost there, folks. Thank you so much for joining us on To The Point. We'll be back next week for the latest political news and everything you need to know as we're just days before Election Day. You can catch us every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. Have a great rest of your weekend.